Howdy. Welcome to Ausgrave Royalty. I am Justin. Welcome back to another video in our ongoing series of King, Warrior, Magician, Lover by Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette. I'd highly recommend the previous videos in this series, which you can find on my channel. And also, if you want to check out Season 1, this is Season 2. Previously, we covered the book Archetypes by Dr. Anthony Stevens. And Season 1 defined things like what is an archetype, why does humanity have it? Is it just this esoteric kind of hippie concept, or is there actually a scientific basis for it? All kinds of stuff like that. I'd highly recommend going through that as well, but not required. Either way, I'm happy you're here. Previously in this series, we've talked about why Moore and Gillette have defined King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, like why they're talking about it, why they see it as an exigent, as a significant issue. And we also talked about the immature versions of these masculine archetypes, which the mature versions, King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. And we talked about the immature versions of that in the previous, and how they can become shadow possessed. And we'll talk more about shadow possession in this video as well when it comes to the mature level. Let's see, was there anything initially I wanted to cover as far as housekeeping? I think that's everything. In this video, we'll be talking about the King archetype, and you might ask, like, well, King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, is there any significance about it being first on the list? And there is, and we'll talk about why. By the end of this video, you should be able to know why yourself, if this video is successful. And we'll be talking about the characteristics of the King, why it's significant, what a healthy King archetype manifests as, and the shadow possessions of the unhealthy King. And there is a key aspect to all of this, which is if you are not acting in a way that is in line with a healthy King energy, then you are being shadow possessed by it, meaning you have something unprocessed that's creating a net negative in your mental health in this category. We've talked about this on the channel before, but often self-help can be a very vague idea. Like, how do you actually do it? And Season 1 with Dr. Anthony Stevens was about laying the foundations for archetypes so that we could cover their application in Season 2, which is actual tools you can use to increase your self-awareness, aka self-awareness is key to mental health. So by increasing your awareness, and this is a way to do it, not the only way, it gives you some tools, some precision tools, based on anthropological evidence of throughout wide variety of cultures throughout human history, via Joseph Campbell and his contemporaries. These are specific tools you can use to increase your own awareness, aka your own mental health, and that's the greatest thing, right? Also, we're talking about King, Warrior, Magician, Lover as mature masculine archetypes, but through the anima and the animus, men and women can access the other side's archetype. So women might see some of their own inner king in their lives as we talk about it, and vice versa. Men through the anima can access the feminine archetypes, which is not the subject of this season, but it's a Jungian principle, right? It's it's the way towards wholeness to be able to integrate those kinds of things. And we talked a little bit about the anima and the animus in the last season. All right. So there is significance for the king being the first of the masculine archetypes, and it may be more, may have served drama better to have like a warrior, lover, magician, whatever, but the king, right? It's like the final boss, the apex. Well, instead of thinking about the archetypes hierarchically like that, they all serve different purposes, but it's more like the king isn't like isn't the apex, but he's the container for the other archetypes to either thrive or not. And this is what we're going to be talking about, and which is why the king comes first. It's the most fundamental of the 4 masculine archetypes and has an unofficial authority within the group, so to speak. The king, I'm looking at my notes in front of me. The king creates the space for the other archetypes to thrive. And you can't have, like, if you have an unhealthy king, you can't have a healthy warrior or a healthy magician, because there's no space for them to thrive. If you have undeveloped king energy, again, I'm laughing at myself for using the term unironically, but it is a very serious matter. If you have an unhealthy king energy, your world is very small, or it's way too big, and we'll go into more about that, those specifics in just a bit. So every king, warrior, magician, lover, each of these archetypes, to me, they ask a question. And to me, the king asks the question, is X part of the vision, right? Is taking this job part of the vision I have for my life? Is going on a family trip solely because I feel obligated to do so part of my vision? Is the way he or she is talking to me part of my vision for my life? It's the inner authority by which you give space for things to exist in your life or not. There's like an expression I'm going to butcher, which is like, nothing can grow unless you feed it. And when it comes to mental health or toxic thoughts or unhealthy framing or temper tantrums or wallowing or whining, you just get more of what you feed psychic energy to. So the king reaches out and defines your inner kingdom, your boundaries, and seeks to manifest them in external reality. The king grants the alchemical container, housing the prima materia, which is the issue at hand. And we talked about alchemy in a previous lecture or video. Hope I'm not too lectury, like to keep it conversational. Again, I've said this 100 times before, but I'm not an authority. Think of me as an enthusiastic fan. I'm going to get things wrong. I'm learning all this with you guys. So I'm here to send up the flare and say, hey, y'all might want to check this out. I think this might be valuable. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Anyway, let me know in the comments below as always. So, a fine distinction here. The king archetype is not the ego. The ego is more like a decision maker, casting a deciding vote on like what to do. The king is more like the subject who brings up the subject matter. Like he's the visionary. And wherever there is an environment for creation, creating a choice, a vision, a plan, a boundary, a legacy, so there is the king archetype. And in the ancient myths, the king had tremendous importance, of course. And again, that's not the focus of my efforts here. I'd love to include the anthropological, religious, mythological side, but I'm one humble man. Can't do everything. So yeah, a little out of scope, but I highly encourage y'all to check out that route. And the books that we're covering, the King Warrior Magician Lover book/books, if there are 5 books we're covering in the season, but they're all on King Warrior Magician Lover, and they're all by Moore and Gillette. See my intro video for this season for more details on what that means. But there's a lot of examples that they give in the book. So there was this like force, like a psychic force throughout history of externalizing the king. So like the Roman emperors, like some declared like that they are actually gods. And like in Egypt, ancient Egypt, this was the Pharaoh, right? And this was actually where the red carpet comes from. Like the king is so divine, he shouldn't make contact with like our mundane existence. Otherwise he loses magical powers. And his magical powers are the only thing that's keeping chaos at bay, you know? That's keeping law and order. If the king loses that power, then the kingdom loses that power. And nobody wants a powerless kingdom. So typically, the more extreme that the king was externalized in some kind of authority figure, the more unhealthy the society. So let's talk about 4 key aspects of the king. He's a center, a procreator, a transforming vessel, and a structurer. So as a center, he draws in the divine to the mundane, the sacred to the profane, the potential into the actual. It's the energy that he channels into the man a vision for his life. As procreator, he creates a legacy and exercises his libido, basically utilizing in various ways the energy granted to him from his vision. As transforming vessel, the king creates the psychological boundaries needed for the other archetypes to thrive. And finally, as structurer, he takes his vision into the real world and creates systems, laws, and order. Moore says that the king's enemy is chaos, and it's something I'm sensitive to, being an anarcho-capitalist. People will think, oh, without the government, who will build the roads? You know, it's just going to be Molotov cocktails and Mohawks and biker gangs and all that. That's anarchy, man. Why would you ever want that? Well, anarchy is without rulers. It's not without rules. In the same way, chaos is not freedom, right? And I actually talked about that in my thoughts on music composition. I have a video about that. It's just about when composing, often often beauty only results from the boundaries. Like, sorry for the tangent here, but just to illustrate this, if you turned every sound in any given song all the way up to the max, like the kick drum was max volume, the hi-hats, the vocals, it would just be a wall of sound, not music. But it's the space between the notes. It's giving each sound its own boundaries, its own domain. And constraining, not just turning everything up, but by constraining each sound. That's where you get beautiful music. There's an argument to be made. The more constrained a composition, the more beautiful it is. Maybe there's something to that in life as well. If you're exercising and delaying gratification and putting all these constraints on your life, hey man, relax, chill out, you know. But maybe if you constrain your life, you'll have a beautiful life. I don't know. Food for thought. So, a few other points of distinction. While the king creates boundaries, he does not enforce them. That's for the warrior. And we'll talk about all of this in later videos in this series. Stay tuned. While the king creates laws, he does not take pleasure out of the order. It's more of a impetus to organize. And when you're taking pleasure in the beauty that you've created, you're indulging the lover archetype. And when the king procreates the next generation, he isn't initiating them into the tribe. That's for the magician. And we'll talk about that as well. So the king asks, should I build it? The warrior asks, can I haul the materials for it? The magician asks, how should I draw up the blueprints for it? And the lover asks, do I even want to build it? And a friendly reminder here that archetypes have a tie-in with survival and our biology. And we can probably think about how the king energy has served us in our survival. Let me know in the comments below. With an individual man, again, if you're not expressing those aspects in a healthy way, you are being shadow possessed. And again, but on the same token, it's like nobody is in 100% perfect health, right? Nobody's perfectly healthy. But does that mean that aiming for perfect health is unreasonable? Absolutely not. In the same way, most likely we're all possessed by the archetypes in some unhealthy way. It's just to the degree, right? Jung said that what we fail to make conscious will remain unconscious and will act out unconsciously in the real world, and we'll call it fate, right? That comes from a lack of awareness. And that those unconscious impulses reside in the shadow. So Moore and Gillette cite, and we talked about this in the last video about the shadow possessions of the immature versions of these masculine archetypes. Here we're going to talk about the mature shadow possessions, the tyrant and the weakling. And so, yeah, Moore says that far more often than we like to admit, the ego is possessed by one or more complexes and by the archetypal forces behind them. A man may believe he is acting with free will, but close examination reveals that he has acted under inner compulsion. So, let's talk about the tyrant. The tyrant is greedy, he's envious, he's grandiose. They overreact to criticism, they are defensive, and they are paranoid. Moore says that the man possessed by the tyrant has no real conception of service to anyone or anything besides himself. In the family, it is the husband who humiliates his wife and routinely ridicules his children. And Moore has a story from Joseph Campbell about this. Not Joseph, that he got from Joseph Campbell, not about Joseph Campbell. But the story goes that a father was trying to get his son to drink tomato juice, and the boy refused by saying, "I won't drink it. I hate tomato juice." And the mother said, "Don't make him drink tomato juice if he doesn't want to." And the tyrant-possessed father replied, "He can't go through life thinking he can do whatever he wants. Look at me. I've never done anything I wanted to do." And, in 2022, the manosphere would call that last dramatic emotional outburst of, "I've never done anything I wanted to," call that beta behavior or losing frame. Those distinctions in the manosphere are often too blunt of instruments for me. I like the more fine. This is why I'm attracted to this kind of archetypal paradigm. But the alpha beta distinction is kind of, I don't think is too helpful. Maybe this is more precise. Maybe it'll help you more. I don't know. In any case, that's what Moore and Gillette are calling tyrant shadow possession. Looking at my notes here. Yeah. It is important for fathers utilizing the king archetype to create a structured household in some way. But the way here is clearly not ideal, especially that last part about not doing anything he's ever wanted to do. That's an infantile whine. And on the other side, there's the weakling. And this is happy wife, happy life. Like, yes, dear, just abdicating his inner king, just outsourcing all the decision making to other authority figures around him. And yeah, that's an abdication. You cannot have a healthy inner life if that's the way you go about life. And you may have these thoughts like, look how bad she wants it, like wants to run things. Like, I would be causing her distress if I, blah, 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 blah. And often you can look into this, what's called dismissive avoidant or the narcissist. I'm not conflating the two. I'm saying both the dismissive avoidant, this is attachment theory. Go look for the Personal Development School. It's a YouTube channel for more about this. But the dismissive avoidant and the narcissists, like, they misinterpret kindness for weakness. Whereas on the other hand, there's the anxious attachment style, which is like texting, 100 times a day. How are you? What are you up to? Oh, just, they don't have their own life, right? Often these two attract one another in a sick kind of binary way. And it's a strange pattern. Anyway, I'm ranting, but look more into that. The anxious attached and the dismissively attached. And there's a lot of research on that particular dynamic. So, Moore says that the weakling's principal flaws from a medieval point of view were sloth and lethargy, a lack of control of the kingdom. An inner kingdom, really. But what's happening inside is going to flow to the outer world. So Moore says the moody man, the listless man, the man who is apathetic, irritated, anxious, and depressed, the man who is basically naive about what life requires of him. He is possessed by the weakling king. When he isn't overcome with malaise, he's coldly withdrawn. He is the man, rather than stand up for himself, will retreat into a corner and sulk. And a dynamic here is that these kinds of shadow possessions are joined at the hip. The tyrant can all of a sudden become a weakling, and the weakling can all of a sudden snap into a tyrannical rage. And just at one moment to the next, either way, this is shadow possession. And what we're trying to do here is make the unconscious conscious. If you're noticing behaviors like this in yourself, often just by hearing this, you'll be able to know why and where that impulse is originating. You're more prepared to diagnose your inner unhealthy, toxic thought. Like shadow work sounds very vague and ivory tower and new agey, but like Seinfeld had a bit like, what really is dry cleaning? Like, what really is shadow work? Dry cleaning. When you scratch some dirt off your clothes, with your fingernail, that's dry cleaning. In the same way, like, what is shadow work? And it's like, when you suddenly realize the real reason for an impulsive behavior you had, that's shadow work. And a good example of this is in the movie Anger Management. Like, Sandler and Jack Nicholson are living together and temporarily, and Nicholson like throws a plate of his breakfast against the wall in like a huge rage, and Nicholson is like supposed to be the psychologist or therapist or whatever helping Sandler, and Nicholson is like he throws that plate against the wall, and then he's like, now why did I do that? That's a comedy version, but that kind of questioning is shadow work. It's basically just self-awareness. And I mentioned this in one of the previous videos, but a good example is I've been watching Rocky recently. We're rewatching it, and Paulie, yo Paulie, Paulie is a good character for a completely shadow possessed, Shadow King possessed individual. His world is very, very small, like his inner world. Like there's that great scene where he's like, it's my house. I put food on the table, blah, 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 and throws out the turkey that Adrian was cooking for Thanksgiving. And like, I pay for the bills, blah, blah, blah. And then as Rocky is inspiring Adrian's own inner king, so to speak, she finally stands up because she had been a weakling, and then finally stands up to her brother, lets him have it in this like righteous fury, like, shut up, blah, 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 blah. And then all of a sudden Paulie shrinks and he's like, you're supposed to be nice to me. And it's in that, at one moment he's bashing the furniture, throwing out the turkey, screaming with rage. But then Adrian comes at him and then he's like, but you're supposed to be nice to me, and just shrivels up, That's a great example of those. If you're experiencing that in your own life, or if you ever have, this is where that's coming from. That's a perfect example. So, Moore says that the poorly accessed king is not solely the result of culturally determined resistance for probing the reaches of inner space, which we live in a materialistic society. All this psychology nonsense, archetypes, whatever. Get that out of here, So that's one potential proliferation of the lack of king energy in our society, but it's also the consequence of inadequate fathering. And we've talked about the importance of the father archetype and the father in a previous video. There's a video called that in season 1 from when we talked about archetypes by Dr. Anthony Stevens. On this precise subject, Warren Farrell, a luminary in the manosphere, advocate for men's rights and equality for men in today's society. It may sound silly, but it's where we are. Anyway, he said that when one gender suffers, both genders suffer. So both men and women are incredibly unhappy these days. Don't take my word for it. Open your eyes. There is a crisis going on. Warren Farrell has a book called The Boy Crisis. Go check it out. But men used to know utilize their power of their inner king by defining a realm and protecting women. Now that's all been outsourced to the government. And men suffer an identity crisis as a result, and the king archetype fails to develop. And we have the rise of single mother households. Now that we have birth control. So there's toxic masculinity, et cetera, no-fault divorce. Men are despised like crazy right now. And that doesn't serve as a carrot to develop your inner masculinity when it's nothing but derided these days. But anyway, again, more to explore on this, please. I'm just sending up the flare. Hopefully this video really helped. Moore says that we need the energies of the king to put our world in order and to fuel our caring, nurturing efforts, and our efforts to fuel our blessings upon people. Our present world situation is in desperate need of men and women to call up the sacred king within themselves. Don't outsource it. We are dangerously divided against one another. Yeah, that's the urgency. That's why Moore and Gillette are writing this material. So that's all I have for this video. See you in the next video. Looking forward to the comments below. Hope this helped. Have a good one. Bye-bye.